Guys, it's Sunday morning and I'm doing a post-fight reaction video to Gennady Jacobs versus Gennady Golovkin. First and foremost, my scorecard, 114 to 113 in favour of Gennady Jacobs. Out of the 12 rounds, I thought Daniel Jacobs won 7 of the 12 rounds. Triple G scored a knockdown in the 4th round. So whilst I have it 7 rounds to 5, I only have 1 point in it due to the 10-8 round with the Triple G knockdown. Let me start by saying Daniel Jacobs really impressed me in this fight. I thought he was very good indeed. Was it a robbery? No. On my scorecard, 1 point in it, and to be honest, multiple rounds that were very tight and could have gone either way. I scored the first round, for example, to Gennady Jacobs. That was a tight round. You know, on my side, I edged it to Jacobs, but it was low volume from both guys. You could very easily score that round a 10-10 round, which would level the fight up on my scorecard. Or you could maybe side it with Golovkin. You know, I couldn't strongly take issue with you if you did that, whilst it's not what I chose to do. Other rounds in the middle of the fight they were very much back and forth, and very tight rounds indeed. So was it a robbery? Definitely not. Do I think Gennady Jacobs won the fight? By a whisker, yes. As for the scorecards, the 115-112s don't sit well with me. You know, 2 of the judges scored this to Golovkin, 115-112. I think that's very wide. 114 to 113 Golovkin, yeah, I can see that. 115-112, I mean, I guess you could construct an argument to suggest Golovkin won it by that margin. But really, it was a closer fight than that, and I thought Gennady Jacobs' work deserved more recognition on the scorecards than that. The fight started with Daniel Jacobs trying to box on the back foot, and that was clearly a game plan that was designed by his corner. The corner for Daniel Jacobs, who I thought were excellent, by the way, gave crisp, clear, concise instructions in a very calm manner between each round, and told Gennady Jacobs to commit to his jab, to change levels with the jab to the head, and then bank work to the body as well. And that was clearly the approach they had adopted from round 1. Now, I thought that would be an approach that wouldn't prove fruitful for them, because I thought Golovkin's jab, as he showed in the Lemieux fight, and Golovkin's ability to close down the range on a fighter would be superior, and would mean that Daniel Jacobs wouldn't be able to win rounds in that fashion. But boy, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Jacobs not only put a good jab together, but he moved excellently. He changed direction time and time again. He changed angle time and time again. He switched stance. He had real success in this fight for periods. 2 rounds that stick in my mind where he switched to southpaw. And really had effect with that jab against Triple G. I thought the hand speed advantage that Gennady Jacobs showed in this fight was immediately evident. Jacobs' hand speed compared to Triple G was, really a huge eye catcher. Jacobs appeared to be really a notch or 2 quicker than Triple G, and Triple G's 35 now, or he will be in the next month or so. So, that's potentially something to watch out for in future Triple G fights as he gets older. But yeah, Jacobs, I thought on the whole did win the battle of the jabs throughout this fight, and I thought his jab and move technique and boxing was really good. I was really impressed by it. Triple G did try and cut down the ring, but I don't think he was successful at cutting down the ring as he has been against previous opponents. I actually saw several occasions in this fight, I'm talking 4 or 5 or 6 occasions, where Triple G backs Jacobs into the corner, backs Jacobs into the ropes, and I'm thinking, okay, this is Triple G's zone. Triple G has got Jacobs in trouble here. But Jacobs is able to sort of wheel out. He's able to sort of change direction and, switch and move out of that corner and get himself back into the centre of the ring and get the jab back established. I don't know if Triple G's potentially lost a step. A lot of people will think that after a performance against Kell Brook that didn't necessarily impress too many people. Followed up by this fight, which was clearly his closest fight. But Jacobs really impressed me. His reflexes were on point. His jab was on point. His movement was on point. I really thought that he very narrowly did enough to win this fight. And whilst I don't call it a robbery, I think he's got every right to feel disappointed and every right to feel that the fight could have gone his way, definitely. Now, as for Golovkin, this was, I'm not going to say this was a poor performance from Golovkin, but this isn't the Golovkin that I was expecting to see in there. I thought that Golovkin would make substantially easier work of Danny Jacobs than he did do. And you've got to look at what the reasons for that are. I think one of the factors to consider is age. Another one is size. You know, Jacobs missed a £10 check weigh-in, so clearly he, you know, was weighing in well in excess of £170 in there. To me, he looked more like 175 to 180, that kind of range. So I think size is a factor, but I also think age is a factor as well. You know, whether Golovkin's never been, you know, the most swift in the ring, and whether that's, you know, meaning that opponents are able, at this stage now he's in his mid-30s, whether that's able to mean that his opponents are getting more success against him, you know, I'm not clear. But I think one thing is relevant, which is that this is actually, in my opinion, the best opponent Golovkin's fought in his career to date. You know, a lot of people, we've had this debate time and time again on my channel, and I've been very, very consistent with my opinion on this. So long-time viewers will be aware of this, but I've always said that Gennady Golovkin, and for that matter as well, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, were not on my top 3 or top 5 pound for pound list. And the reason I've said that is because, you know, to operate at that sort of level, to be considered a top 3 pound for pound, you've got to be beating other elite fighters. And what I've said is, for no fault of Golovkin's own, you know, he hasn't beaten those elite fighters. I'm not saying that he's avoided those fights or not tried to make those fights, because I believe that would be the incorrect thing to say. But the truth is, we are yet to see Gennady Golovkin versus fellow pound-for-pound level fighters or elite level fighters. And for me, Daniel Jacobs is actually the best opponent he's been in with. He's beaten contenders before. He's beaten, you know, guys at world championship level, guys like Martin Murray, guys like David Lemieux, guys like Matthew Macklin. You know, he's beaten names of that ilk. But he's yet to face someone who I would genuinely have considered as a top 3 middleweight. And last night he did do that against Danny Jacobs. And what's happened? He's been involved in his hardest, toughest, closest fight to date. You know, and there's a strong argument to suggest that he's been beaten. Similarly with Roman Gonzalez, you know, I don't know too much about the sort of tiny weight divisions. You know, I don't follow those divisions as closely, you know, I'll be brutally honest. But the truth is that Roman Gonzalez is another guy who, again, through no fault of his own, probably hasn't fought the biggest names in the sport. And, you know, I understand he lost last night to a fighter who is a Thai boxer, and his last couple of fights have been against very, very minimal level of opposition, including a few debutants. So it's just one of these things. I'm going to watch the Roman Gonzalez fight, and we'll either discuss that in a separate video or discuss that in a podcast. But my point here is, it is not as simple as electing someone as a pound-for-pound number 1 or pound-for-pound top 3 just because they are smashing up opposition at a lower level and scoring a streak of knockouts. Gennady Golovkin is a very, very, very good fighter. He probably is, in my opinion, a pound-for-pound top 7 or 8 fighter. And I've consistently said that on this channel, probably for the last 2 or 3 years. But I think it is too early to elect someone as a pound-for-pound great until they beat the elite of their division, no matter how good you look doing it against a lower level of opposition, you know. And that's raised a question for me now. Golovkin's gone in against the best opponent, and, you know, what's happened? He hasn't scored a knockout. He hasn't scored a knockout against a guy who's been knocked out. He's gone the distance for the first time, and he's gone 12 rounds for the first time in his career. It's the first time I'm aware of a Golovkin fight where people are crying robbery. So this is my point. You know, if you're a big puncher, if you're a very, very high-class boxer, pressure fighter with immense punching power, and you start knocking out a load of top 10 contenders like Golovkin's been doing, yes, it may mean that you're the number 1 middleweight in the sport. But does it mean you're the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport? No. Because to be number 1 pound-for-pound, you can only judge that if you're running through the elite. And as I say, we've seen him now against a top 3 fighter. He didn't knock out a guy who's been knocked out. He went 12 rounds for the first time in his career. And we've got a scorecard where I personally scored it to Jacobs. So my point I'm trying to make here is don't anoint people as pound-for-pound great too early on. You know, Golovkin's a very, very good fighter. As I say, I had Jacobs winning by 1 point. I can't take too much issue with Golovkin winning by the same scorecard, 114, 113. But after this fight, you know, how many times have I had questions on this channel, how do you think Golovkin would do at £168? And I've said, I don't think he'd do very well at all, because I don't think his power would have the same sting, and I don't think he'd have, I think he'd be very, very, very small at the weight. You know, look how small he looked compared to Jacobs last night. Look at the fact that his power didn't seem to have quite the same sting on it as it normally does. You know, that tells you up at 168, where the guys are much bigger, much stronger. You know, you get guys like George Groves who are 6'1", 6'2". You know, you get guys, you know, like Badu Jack, who probably could easily be light heavyweights, etc. This is Golovkin is a very, very good middleweight. He's the best middleweight in the sport. But is he a champion at 168? Not for my money. Not for my money. I think there's a potential that his attributes won't correspond so well at £168. I think there's a fair shout to see a rematch here, I must admit. You know, after the fight they were talking not about Billy Joe Saunders, they were talking about Canelo Alvarez. They were talking about making that Canelo Alvarez fight. I suspect that Canelo Alvarez fight doesn't happen. I really don't think that fight happens. So, you know, assuming that fight doesn't happen, you've got options between a Jacobs rematch and a Saunders fight. I honestly think they'll go the Jacobs rematch route. Jacobs is a bigger name in America. The fact that there's been a controversial first fight is going to build that. And I think Billy Joe Saunders is going to be left out in the cold massively, which is very, very bad news for us in the UK who are Billy Joe Saunders fans, because, you know, as you guys know, Billy Joe Saunders has been highly inactive and really struggling to gain momentum in his career. And there was lots of talk that he's going to fight Golovkin, and I imagine the Jacobs rematch will be more appealing to them. It may actually be a blessing in disguise for Billy Joe Saunders. Having said that, having watched the fight last night, having watched how Jacobs had success behind a jab, having watched how Jacobs could use angles and spin, having watched how Jacobs could establish his jab, you know, Billy Joe Saunders is a fighter who can do a lot of those things just as well. What he lacks is the power of Jacobs, he lacks the size of Jacobs, and he maybe lacks the fitness Jacobs showed in the later rounds. So I'm not saying I'd necessarily pick Billy Joe to beat Golovkin off the back of that, but certainly I'd make it a more intriguing fight, especially as Golovkin enters his, you know, his 35th year, and especially as Golovkin appears to have slowed a bit. You know, Billy Joe Saunders certainly has some advantages in that fight, but I think his Achilles heels, if you like, could potentially find him out, unfortunately. But yeah, don't be surprised to see that Jacobs rematch, because I can't see that Canelo fight happening. And you know, as much as Billy Joe Saunders has been hinting that the Golovkin fight was on the horizon, you'll notice at the end during the post-fight interviews, it was all talk about Canelo, not about Billy Joe Saunders. And I think there'll be cause for that Danny Jacobs rematch, having seen how close and how controversial that first fight was. You know, Golovkin, very, very, very good fighter. £168 champion, not for my money. You know, bizarrely, I think he's actually got more of a claim for being considered, and as I say, I scored to fight Jacobs, bizarrely more of a claim for being considered a pound-for-pound top-3 fighter after this fight rather than before the fight, given the fact that now, at least on a resume alone, he's proven that he can beat a top-3 middleweight. But that's just my thoughts. Very, very busy weekend, but more coverage to come. I'm going to look at the Chocolatito fight. Got a few other bits and pieces for people as well. So if you're enjoying my stuff, please hit subscribe. We do a podcast every Wednesday at 8:30 that will be back this week, so check that out. And if you've enjoyed the video, please take the time to leave a comment in the section below. Let me know your thoughts on this fight. How did you score it? Was it a robbery? Let me know your take. Also, help support the channel by clicking the thumbs up button. Massively assists me getting more visibility. And hitting the subscribe button, because we're trying to build things out. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good weekend. Cheers.